Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the bolts on the frame of a tractor. A lot of people don't really have a need to look at this ever, but one of the big things on a tractor is that the frame of the tractor is really attached to the engine block in most cases, right? So the engine block on the motor kind of becomes the primary backbone to the frame of the entire tractor. So when you look at the frame bolts, those bolts are special bolts. They're not regular ones. And what people will do if that bolt becomes loose is they will replace the bolt with a different style bolt, perhaps that doesn't have a flange on it. And then eventually the frame on the tractor will kind of move up and down with the machine, especially as the loader. If you've got a machine with a loader on it, you'll use the loader a lot, and the front end of the machine has weight on it. And this frame plate, these frame rails that sit alongside the motor, the block, they become loose from the block. And that's a problem. It's one of the things that people don't realize is probably happening a lot. And the frame will crack. The frame rails will crack. And in some cases, the frame rails will separate completely from the bolts, or the bolts could shear as well. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of how you want to avoid that, right? You don't want to have your bolts become loose, and then you don't want those frame rails ever to become loose from the block. And you want to check those and make sure they're torqued to whatever the specs are on the manufacturing specs on the machine. And I also want to show you typical things that cause this to happen, right? So lots of times people will take the bolt off of the machine that was there with a flange on it. So this one here has a flange. You can kind of see it, but I'll show it at a different angle. See that flange? That flange is what the frame rail needs to keep it from wandering on the block. So if you'll notice on a regular carriage bolt or bolt, there's no flange on there, and people will take a regular bolt, this is not the right one, and they will put that on there because the threads fit, and they'll torque it down. And what happens is the rails will start to wander around because there's no flange. That flange keeps that rail from wandering and wiggling back and forth every time the loader is used or the machine travels over some bumps in the front. So super important if you're gonna change out the bolts on the frame on a tractor, and the frame rails are mounted to the block, which almost all tractors are like this, and that's the backbone of your strength to the frame of the machine. You want to use the flange style bolts. Get the right ones. Get the exact bolt that you need from the manufacturer and use that. Never try to use a bolt without a flange and try to torque it down thinking it's going to stay. It just won't stay, and I don't care how tight you get it. It'll come loose eventually, and it'll shear the bolt, or you'll get a bunch of loose bolts on the frame and the machine will develop a crack on the frame. And once you get a crack on the frame, you're gonna have to weld it, and you're gonna hope it holds. So you don't want all that to happen. So what you wanna do is keep an eye on the bolts. There's usually 6 or 8 different bolts on each side of the block with the frame rails attached to the block. And you want to keep those kind of snug, right? Always keep them snug, and always use the right ones, right? Always use the ones with the flange on there, because it'll just bring a bunch of issues later on with cracked frame rails and/or separation of the frame rails completely from the block, which would be a complete failure. You would definitely notice all that. The front end of the machine, if this starts to wander, will come up and down. The hood, the grill, the radiator, all that is attached to your rails, right? So all those things will be moving around, and they really should not be moving at all. So just wanted to give a quick video on that. I've seen a few tractors, more than a few over the years, come with cracked frame rails, and really the first thing you check are the bolts, and 9 times out of 10 the bolts are loose, and they failed because either it's the wrong bolt or they weren't torqued down and maintained over time by the owners, and they just let them go. So hopefully this is helpful. Check your bolts on your frame rails and make sure they're nice and snug. And also, if they're not snug, just make sure you've got the right ones in there. Don't try to retorque the ones without the flanges. Replace them with the correct ones with flanges on them.